Have you ever lived in a house that felt completely empty, even when someone you love was right beside you? This is my real story in America, where I smiled during the day but quietly missed home every night, where love felt distant. And simple words like "I feel alone" were the hardest to say. But something changed. Not overnight, not perfectly. Stay with me, because what I discovered might change how you see love, family, and what home really means. I still miss home. Have you ever sat in a quiet room that looks perfect, but somehow feels completely wrong? Not broken. Not loud. Just empty in a way you cannot explain. I didn't expect that feeling to follow me here. Because from the outside, my life in America looks stable. I have a home. I have a partner. I have a routine that many people would call a good life. Every morning, I wake up, make coffee, and look out the window at a calm, organized neighborhood. Cars move slowly. People smile politely. Everything works the way it should. And yet, there are moments, small, quiet moments, when something inside me whispers, "This is not home." It usually happens at night. Not during busy hours, not when I'm distracted. Only when everything slows down. When the lights are off. When conversations are over. When the world becomes quiet enough for my thoughts to get louder. I would sit there, sometimes next to the person I love, and still feel alone. Not because they did anything wrong. But because I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. You see, missing home is not always about a place. It's not just about your old room, your street, or your favorite food. It's deeper than that. It's about a feeling of being understood, without needing to explain yourself. And that feeling? I didn't have it anymore. At least, not at the beginning. There's something no one really tells you about building a life somewhere new, especially in a place like the United States. Where independence is strong and emotions are often quiet. People here are kind. They respect your space. They don't ask too many personal questions. And at first, that feels comfortable. But after a while, it can feel like distance. In my old life, I didn't have to say much. People just knew. If I was tired, someone noticed. If I was quiet, someone asked. If I was struggling, I didn't have to translate my feelings into perfect sentences. Here, it was different. Here, if I didn't say it, no one knew. And that's where the real struggle began. Because expressing emotions in another language is not just about vocabulary. It's about courage. Simple sentences like, "I feel lonely," or "I need you to understand me," suddenly felt heavy. Not difficult in grammar, but difficult in emotion. My brain would pause. My heart would hesitate. And most of the time, I stayed silent. There's actually a psychological reason for this. When you are in a new environment, your brain goes into a kind of energy-saving mode. It focuses on survival, understanding, adapting, not making mistakes. Emotional expression becomes secondary. In simple words, your brain is busy trying to function, so it avoids vulnerability. And that's exactly what happened to me. I functioned well. I smiled. I responded. I did everything right. But I wasn't fully present. And when you're not fully present in your own life, even love can start to feel distant. One night, I remember sitting on the couch, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. My partner was next to me, scrolling on their phone. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. Everything looked normal. But inside, I felt like I was watching my own life from far away. That's when a quiet thought appeared in my mind. If I feel this alone here, where is my home now? Not where I came from. Not where I am. So where? That question stayed with me longer than I expected. And the strange part is, I didn't tell anyone about it. Because from the outside, nothing was wrong. No big fights. No dramatic problems. No clear reason to feel this way. Just a quiet, growing distance between what my life looked like, and how it actually felt. Maybe you understand this more than you think. Maybe you've also had moments where everything seems fine, but something inside you feels missing. Maybe you've smiled at people, while quietly feeling disconnected. Maybe you've told yourself, it's okay. This is just how life is. But deep down, you know, it doesn't have to feel this way. Here's the truth I didn't understand at the time. A house becomes a home not when everything looks right, but when you feel safe enough to be real. And I wasn't there yet. Not because I didn't have love. But because I didn't know how to live that love, honestly. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. I wasn't just missing my old home. I was missing a version of myself that felt understood, connected, and at ease. And until I could rebuild that feeling again, no place would ever feel like home. That realization didn't fix everything overnight. But it started something. A small shift. A quiet awareness. The kind that doesn't change your life instantly, but slowly begins to change how you see it. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. Because the moment you ask, why do I feel this way? Is the moment you stop running from the answer. And I was about to find mine. But not in the way I expected. A house isn't a home. Have you ever noticed how two people can live under the same roof, share the same bed, eat at the same table, and still feel like strangers? It sounds dramatic, right? But the truth is, it doesn't happen suddenly. It happens quietly. Slowly. Almost politely. That was my life. If someone walked into our home, they would probably say, this is nice. Clean space. Warm lighting. Organized kitchen. Two people who respect each other. No shouting. No chaos. Everything looked right. But something felt off. Not broken. Just missing. And the strangest part? I couldn't explain what it was. In the United States, there's a strong idea of personal space. People respect boundaries. They don't interrupt. They don't assume. On paper, that sounds healthy, and it is. But when two people both wait for the other to speak first, silence becomes normal. And silence, over time, becomes distance. We weren't fighting. We were just not connecting. Our conversations became short and functional. Did you eat? Yes. How was your day? Busy. And that was it. No depth. No follow-up. No real sharing. At first, I told myself this was just adulthood. This is what stable life looks like. No drama. No stress. Just calm. But here's something most people don't realize. Your brain is not designed to feel fulfilled by just calm. According to behavioral psychology, humans need emotional engagement, not just stability. When your interactions become too predictable and low in emotional exchange, your brain starts to disengage. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough to make you feel less alive. And that's exactly what I felt. Less alive. I remember one evening, I was cooking dinner. The smell was familiar, something from my past, something that used to feel like comfort. For a second, I felt something warm inside me, like a memory trying to come back. But then I looked around. Different kitchen. Different country. Different life. And suddenly, that warm feeling disappeared. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just missing a place. I was missing a feeling that I didn't know how to recreate. You see, a house gives you structure. But a home gives you emotional safety. A place where you don't have to explain your silence. A place where someone notices small changes in your mood. A place where even quiet moments feel connected. And I didn't have that yet. Not because the other person didn't care, but because I wasn't showing my real self. There's a concept in psychology called emotional visibility. It simply means people can only respond to what they can see. If you hide your feelings, people don't ignore you. They just don't know. And I was very good at hiding. I smiled when I needed to. I responded when spoken to. I did everything correctly. But I never said the one thing that mattered most. I don't feel at home. Why? Because saying that feels risky. Especially in a relationship. Your brain immediately asks. What if they don't understand? What if they think I'm ungrateful? What if this creates a problem? So instead of speaking, you adjust. You lower your expectations. You tell yourself, this is enough. But your body knows the truth. That quiet heaviness in your chest? That's not random. That's your mind asking for connection. There's actually research showing that emotional suppression increases internal stress, even when everything looks fine externally. Your body keeps score. It remembers what you don't say. And over time, that unspoken feeling doesn't disappear. It grows. Not louder. Just deeper. One night, something small happened, but it changed everything. We were sitting together again, same couch, same routine. But this time, I decided to try something different. Nothing big. No long speech. Just one simple sentence. I feel a little disconnected. Even saying that felt uncomfortable. My voice wasn't strong. My grammar wasn't perfect. But it was real. And something unexpected happened. There was a pause. Not an awkward one. A real one. The kind where someone is actually thinking, actually listening. Then came a question I didn't expect. What do you mean? Not defensive. Not confused. Just open. And in that moment, I realized something important. Maybe the distance wasn't because we didn't care. Maybe it was because we didn't know how to reach each other. In American culture, communication is often direct, but emotional expression still requires intention. People don't guess your feelings. They wait for you to say them. And if you never do, the connection never deepens. That night, we didn't solve everything. We didn't suddenly become perfect. But something shifted. A door opened. And for the first time, the space between us didn't feel so fixed. It felt flexible. Like something that could change. And that's when I started to understand. A home is not built by walls or routines. It's built by moments of truth. Even small ones. Especially small ones. Because every honest sentence you say is like placing one brick in something real. And I had just placed my first one. Not perfectly. Not confidently. But honestly. And that was enough to begin. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't living in the wrong place. I was just living without emotional connection. And once that connection starts to grow, even the same space begins to feel different. Not immediately, but slowly. And slowly is how real things are built. The house didn't change, but something inside it did. And for the first time, I thought, maybe this place can become a home. But I still had one problem. I didn't know how to keep that connection going. Because one honest moment is powerful. But consistency? That's where most people fail. And I was about to learn that the hard way. Silent nights together. Have you ever laid next to someone you love, and felt like there was an invisible wall between you? Not a fight. Not anger. Just silence that feels heavier than words. That kind of silence doesn't show up in photos. It doesn't appear in social media posts. From the outside, everything still looks calm, stable, even perfect, by American standards. But inside that silence, something slowly starts to disappear. Connection. And the scary part is, you don't notice it right away. Because in the United States, silence is often misunderstood as peace. People respect quiet. They don't push. They don't ask too many questions. If nothing is wrong on the surface, everything is assumed to be okay. But here's something most people don't say out loud. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes, it's avoidance. And I didn't realize I was avoiding my own feelings. At night, everything became clearer. During the day, life kept me busy. Work, small tasks, daily routines, they gave my brain something to focus on. They kept me moving. But at night, there was nothing to hide behind. No noise. No distraction. Just me, my thoughts, and the quiet space between two people who didn't quite know how to reach each other. I remember one specific night. The room was dark except for a soft light from the hallway. I could hear the faint sound of cars passing outside. My partner was next to me, already lying still. Everything looked normal. But I was wide awake. Not because I had too much energy, but because my mind wouldn't rest. Thoughts started to loop. Why do I feel like this? Is this just how relationships become over time? Or am I missing something important? There's a concept in neuroscience called cognitive looping. When your brain doesn't resolve an emotional question, it keeps repeating it, hoping for an answer. But if you don't face the question, the loop continues. And mine kept going. Night after night. I didn't say anything. Because again, nothing was technically wrong. No big problems. No clear reason to complain. Just a feeling. And feelings are easy to ignore, until they aren't. What made it harder was the language barrier, not in vocabulary, but in emotional fluency. It's one thing to say, I am tired. It's another to say, I feel disconnected, and I don't know why. The second sentence requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, especially in a second language, feels like standing without protection. Your brain hesitates. Your heart holds back. So instead, you choose the safer option. Silence. But silence has a cost. According to emotional psychology research, unexpressed feelings don't disappear, they convert into internal stress. Your body stays alert. Your mind stays active. That's why even when you're physically tired, you can't sleep. That was me. Lying there, eyes open, pretending to rest. next to someone I loved, but couldn't fully reach. There's a strange kind of loneliness that only happens in relationships. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being unseen. And that's much harder to explain. Because when you're alone, the problem is obvious. But when you're with someone, and still feel alone, your brain starts questioning everything. Is it me? Am I expecting too much? Or am I not giving enough? And here's where things get even more complicated. In American culture, independence is valued. People are taught to handle their own emotions, to not depend too much on others. That's a strength, but in relationships, it can quietly create distance. Because when both people are handling themselves, no one is reaching out. No one is bridging the gap. And the gap slowly grows. That night, I almost said something. I turned slightly, looked at the person next to me, and opened my mouth. Then stopped. The sentence formed in my head. Do you ever feel like we're not really here? But I didn't say it. Because I wasn't sure how it would sound. Too dramatic. Too confusing. Too unnecessary. So I stayed quiet. And that moment passed. But here's what I didn't understand at the time. Every moment you choose silence over honesty. You teach your relationship to stay shallow. Not intentionally. Just, gradually. The brain loves patterns. If you repeat silence, it becomes your default. If you avoid emotional conversations, your brain starts to label them as dangerous or unnecessary. And soon, even when you want to speak, it feels unnatural. That's how distance becomes normal. Not because of one big event, but because of many small moments, left unspoken. Eventually, I fell asleep that night. But not peacefully. It was the kind of sleep where your body rests, but your mind doesn't fully let go. And the next day? Everything looked the same again. Morning routine. Coffee. Polite conversation. No one would know what happened the night before. Because technically, nothing happened. And that's the problem. Nothing happening can slowly become everything. If you've ever felt this, you're not alone. Many people in stable relationships experience this phase. It's not failure. It's not the end. It's a signal. A quiet one. A signal that something deeper is needed. More honesty. More presence. More emotional risk. But here's the challenge. Taking that step feels uncomfortable. Because it requires you to go first. To speak before you're sure. To express before you feel ready. And I wasn't ready yet. Not fully. But something inside me was getting tired of the silence. Tired of pretending everything was okay. Tired of waiting for the perfect moment to speak. Because deep down, I started to realize. There is no perfect moment. There is only the moment you choose to be real. And I was getting closer to that point. Closer than I thought. Because the truth is, silence can feel safe. But it never builds a home. And if I wanted this place to feel like home, I couldn't stay quiet forever. Something had to change. And next time, I wouldn't stop myself. Even if my voice wasn't perfect. Even if my words were simple. Because connection doesn't require perfection. It only requires honesty. And I was finally ready to try again. Small cultural clashes. Have you ever argued with someone you love, not because of something big, but because of something so small you almost feel embarrassed to explain it? Like how to spend a Sunday. Or how often to call family. Or even, how long a hug should last. It sounds insignificant. But those small things? They carry entire worlds behind them. And I didn't realize how different my world was, until I started living it every day. In the United States, people often say, it's your life. Do what makes you happy. Respect each other's space. Don't interfere too much. At first, I liked that idea. Freedom. Independence. No pressure. But over time, that same freedom started to feel like distance. Because where I come from, love doesn't always look like space. It looks like checking in. It looks like asking questions. It looks like showing up, even when it's inconvenient. So when those small moments didn't happen, I felt something missing. Not dramatically. Just quietly. One example. Weekends. In my mind, weekends were for connection. Cooking together. Talking longer. Maybe calling family back home. Slowing down and being present. But here, weekends often meant personal time. Let's do our own thing. I need to recharge. Maybe later. No conflict. No rejection. Just different expectations. And that's where the tension began. Not loud tension. Internal tension. Because I didn't know if I should say something, or just adapt. Your brain does something interesting in situations like this. It tries to avoid conflict by normalizing discomfort. You start telling yourself, this is just how it is. Don't overthink. It's not a big deal. And you're right. Each moment, by itself, is not a big deal. But repeated over time, they become a pattern. And patterns shape how you feel in a relationship. Another example was communication style. In American culture, communication is often direct, but also efficient. People say what they mean, but they don't always say everything they feel. Back home, communication felt layered. Even silence had meaning. Tone mattered. Timing mattered. Here, if something isn't said clearly, it often doesn't exist. And that created confusion. There were moments I expected my partner to just know how I felt. But they didn't. Not because they didn't care. Because they couldn't read what I didn't show. And instead of explaining, I felt disappointed. That's the trap. Expecting understanding without expression. It sounds poetic. But in reality, it doesn't work. There's actually a concept in cross-cultural psychology called high context versus low context communication. Some cultures rely heavily on unspoken cues, tone, body language, shared understanding. Others rely on explicit language, clear words, direct meaning. When these two styles meet, misunderstandings are almost guaranteed. And that's exactly what was happening. Not because we were incompatible, but because we were speaking different emotional languages. Even when the words were in English. One evening, something small turned into something bigger. We were deciding what to do for dinner. Simple, right? But it turned into this quiet tension. I'm okay with anything, they said. And I replied, you always say that. It wasn't about the food. It was about feeling like the decision, and the effort, was always floating in the air, never fully shared. To them, flexibility was kindness. To me, it felt like distance. Same situation. Completely different interpretation. That's when I started to realize. We weren't arguing about actions. We were reacting to meanings. And meanings are shaped by culture, experience, and expectation. Not by intention. No one was wrong. But something still didn't feel right. Later that night, I sat quietly and asked myself a question I had been avoiding. Am I trying to recreate my old definition of home, in a completely different environment? And the answer was, yes. I was holding on to a version of connection that made sense in my past. But I hadn't learned how to build that connection here. In this culture. In this relationship. In this life. And that gap, that difference between expectation and reality, was creating friction. Not visible. But very real. There's something important to understand here. Cultural differences don't destroy relationships. Unspoken expectations do. Because when you don't express what something means to you, the other person fills in the meaning with their own understanding. And that's where disconnect grows. Slowly. Quietly. Almost politely. Looking back, I can see that those small clashes were not problems. They were signals. Signals that we needed to learn each other more deeply. Not just habits. But meanings. What does care look like to you? What does together time feel like? What does home actually mean? Those are not simple questions. But without them, everything stays on the surface. And surface-level connection doesn't last. That night, I didn't have all the answers. But I had a new awareness. I stopped seeing these moments as frustrations. And started seeing them as opportunities. Not to win. But to understand. And that shift, small as it sounds, changed something inside me. Instead of thinking, why is this happening? I started asking, what is this trying to show me? And the answer was clear. If I wanted this place to feel like home, I couldn't expect it to look like my past. I had to build something new. Something that included both of us. Both cultures. Both styles. Both ways of loving. And that meant learning something I had avoided for too long. How to explain my world, in a way someone else could understand. Not perfectly. Not completely. But honestly. Because without that, we were just two people living in the same house. Not building a home. And I was finally ready to change that. Even if it felt uncomfortable. Even if it meant starting small. Because sometimes, the smallest differences are the ones that teach you the most. And I was about to learn how to turn those differences into connection. When love feels distant. Have you ever looked at someone you love, and felt like they were just a little too far away to reach? Not physically. Not emotionally gone. Just, slightly out of touch. Like you're both standing in the same room, but somehow living in different worlds. That feeling is subtle. It doesn't break things immediately. It doesn't create dramatic moments. It just slowly changes how you experience love. And that's exactly where I found myself. Because here's the confusing part. I still loved them. They still cared about me. Nothing had disappeared. But something had faded. And I couldn't explain it at first. In the United States, relationships often prioritize balance, personal space, individual goals, mutual respect. These are healthy foundations. But what people don't always talk about is how easy it is to confuse balance with distance. You give each other space. You respect boundaries. You don't interrupt. And suddenly, you stop reaching. That's what happened to us. We became very good at not bothering each other. Which sounds polite. But connection doesn't grow from politeness. It grows from presence. There's a concept in relationship psychology called emotional availability. It means not just being there physically, but being mentally and emotionally engaged. And here's the truth. You can be physically present and emotionally unavailable at the same time. That realization hit me one afternoon. We were sitting together, again, same pattern. Phones in hand. Light conversation. Comfortable silence. But something felt off. I decided to test something. Not a big action. Just a small shift. I put my phone down. Completely. No distraction. No scrolling. Just sat there. At first, nothing changed. Then I noticed something interesting. Without the distraction, I became more aware. Of the silence. Of the distance. Of the fact that we weren't really connecting. And that awareness felt uncomfortable. Your brain doesn't like discomfort. So what does it do? It tries to escape. Pick up the phone. Turn on the TV. Change the topic. Do anything to avoid that feeling. Because staying in that awareness requires something difficult. Honesty. And honesty is risky. Because once you admit something feels off, you can't pretend anymore. But that day, I didn't escape. I stayed in that moment. And I asked myself a simple question. If I don't change anything, will this feeling disappear? The answer was obvious. No. It wouldn't. Because feelings like this don't fade on their own. They either grow, or transform. And transformation requires action. Small, uncomfortable action. That's when I started noticing patterns I had ignored before. We weren't asking deeper questions anymore. We weren't sharing random thoughts. We weren't laughing the same way. Not because we didn't want to. But because we had slowly stopped trying. And here's something important. Effort in relationships doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades quietly, when it's not maintained. Like a habit you forget to practice. There's research showing that long-term relationships depend less on big moments and more on consistent micro-connections, small interactions that create emotional closeness. A short conversation. A simple check-in. A moment of real attention. Without these, connection weakens. Not dramatically. Just enough to feel it. And I was finally feeling it. One evening, I decided to do something different again. Still small. Still simple. I asked a question. Not the usual, how was your day? But something slightly deeper. What was the most interesting thing you thought about today? There was a pause. Not because the question was difficult. But because it was unexpected. And then, slowly, the answer came. It wasn't long. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And something shifted. Just a little. That moment taught me something powerful. Connection doesn't require big changes. It requires intentional ones. You don't need perfect words. You need real ones. Even simple English, like I feel a little far today, can open a door. It's not about sounding fluent. It's about being honest. That's something many people misunderstand when learning English in real life. They think, I'll speak when I'm better. I'll express more when I'm confident. But connection doesn't wait for perfection. It responds to authenticity. And that applies not just to language, but to relationships. Looking back, I realized I had been waiting. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for things to fix themselves. But nothing changes if no one moves first. And that's the uncomfortable truth. If you want connection, you have to risk being the one who reaches. Even if it feels one-sided at first. Even if you're not sure how it will be received. Because distance doesn't close itself. It closes when someone steps forward. That night, after that small conversation, nothing dramatic happened. No big realization. No emotional breakthrough. But the space between us felt slightly different. Less fixed. More open. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was watching my life from the outside. I felt present. Just a little. And sometimes, that's enough. Because real change doesn't start with big moments. It starts with small shifts in awareness. Small choices to stay instead of escape. Small efforts to connect instead of withdraw. And slowly, those small moments begin to add up. That's when I understood something clearly. Love doesn't disappear. It just becomes quiet, when it's not expressed. And if you want to hear it again, you have to be willing to speak first. Even softly. Even imperfectly. Because distance in love is not a sign that it's over. It's a signal that something needs attention. And I was finally ready to pay attention. Not perfectly. But consistently. And consistency is where everything begins to change. The moment I finally spoke. What if the one thing you've been avoiding is the exact thing that could change everything? Not a big decision. Not a dramatic action. Just a conversation you keep postponing. Because you're not sure how it will go. Because you don't have the perfect words. Because a part of you is afraid it might not matter. That was me. For a long time, I stayed quiet. Not completely silent, but careful. Careful with my words. Careful with my tone. Careful not to create problems. Because in my mind, speaking up meant risking peace. And peace felt important. But here's what I didn't understand at the time. Silence doesn't protect peace. It delays truth. And delayed truth slowly turns into distance. By this point, I was already aware that something felt off. Not broken. Not failing. Just not fully alive. And I had a choice. Keep adjusting quietly. Or finally say something real. That choice sounds simple. But emotionally, it's not. Because when you decide to speak honestly, you step into uncertainty. You don't control how the other person responds. You don't know if they'll understand. You don't even know if you'll express it clearly. And when English is not your first language, that fear doubles. You start thinking. What if I say it wrong? What if it sounds too emotional? What if I can't explain what I really feel? So instead of risking imperfection, you choose silence. That's the trap. Not language. But fear. The fear of being misunderstood. The fear of being too much. The fear of making something small feel big. But here's the truth I learned. Unspoken feelings don't stay small. They grow quietly. Until one day, they come out in ways you didn't intend. in frustration, in withdrawal, in emotional distance. And by then, it's harder to explain. So one evening, I made a decision. Not a big one. Just a clear one. I was going to speak. Not perfectly. Not completely. But honestly. We were sitting together after dinner. Nothing unusual. Same routine. Same comfortable silence. But this time, I didn't let the moment pass. I took a breath. And I said something simple. I think I've been feeling a little far lately. That was it. Not dramatic. Not detailed. Just real. And then I stopped. Because something important happens when you say something honest. You create space. Not just for your words. But for the other person to respond. There was a pause. And in that pause, my mind started racing. Was that clear enough? Did I say it right? Should I explain more? But I didn't interrupt. I let the silence stay. And then came the response. Not defensive. Not confused. Just curious. What do you mean? That question changed everything. Because it wasn't rejection. It was an invitation. An invitation to explain. To clarify. To go deeper. And suddenly, the conversation I had been avoiding felt possible. So I continued. Slowly. Carefully. I don't think anything is wrong. I just feel like we don't connect as much as before. Again, simple English. No complex vocabulary. No perfect structure. But it was enough. Because clarity is more powerful than complexity. And honesty is more powerful than perfection. That's something many people overlook when learning English. They focus on sounding correct. But real communication is about being understood. And being understood starts with being real. The conversation that followed wasn't perfect. There were moments of hesitation. Moments of misunderstanding. But there was also something new. Effort. From both sides. They started asking questions. Not to argue. But to understand. What makes you feel connected? What do you miss? What would help? And for the first time, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was explaining. That shift, from expectation to expression, changed everything. Because expectations are silent. Expression is visible. And relationships need visibility. They need clarity. They need shared understanding. Without that, even good intentions can feel like distance. There's something else I realized during that conversation. The other person wasn't aware of the problem. Not because they didn't care. But because I hadn't shown it. That's a hard truth to accept. We often think. They should know. They should feel it. But people don't experience your inner world unless you share it. And sharing requires vulnerability. Which is uncomfortable. But necessary. As the conversation continued, something shifted inside me. Not just in the relationship. In me. I stopped seeing communication as a risk. And started seeing it as a tool. A way to build. A way to shape the connection I wanted. Instead of waiting for it to happen. That's when I understood something clearly. You don't find connection. You create it. Through words. Through actions. Through consistency. And sometimes, through very simple English. I miss this. I need this. I feel this. Those sentences are not complicated. But they are powerful. Because they are clear. And clarity reduces distance. By the end of that night, nothing was magically fixed. We didn't suddenly become perfect. But something important had changed. We were aware. Aware of each other. Aware of the gap. Aware of what needed attention. And awareness is the beginning of change. Not action. Not solutions. Just awareness. Because once you see something clearly, you can't ignore it anymore. And that's exactly where we were. Not at the end of a problem. But at the beginning of understanding. And for the first time in a long time. That felt like progress. Real progress. Not loud. Not dramatic. But honest. And honesty is where real connection begins. Even if it starts with just one sentence. Even if that sentence feels small. Because sometimes the smallest words are the ones that open the biggest doors. Learning to build, not just feel. What if love isn't something you find, but something you build, one small, intentional moment at a time? That idea changed everything for me. Because before that conversation, I believed connection should feel natural. Effortless. Automatic. If two people cared about each other, things should just work. Right? But real life, especially in a different culture, a different rhythm, a different way of living, doesn't work like that. Connection doesn't maintain itself. It requires design. Not in a cold, calculated way. But in a conscious, consistent way. After that honest conversation, something subtle shifted between us. We didn't suddenly become closer overnight. But we became aware. And awareness creates responsibility. Because once you understand what's missing, you can't pretend it doesn't matter. So the question became, what do we do now? Not theoretically. Practically. What does building connection actually look like in daily life? That's where the real work began. And it didn't start with something big. It started with structure. In the United States, people often structure their lives around productivity, work schedules, personal time, individual priorities. That structure is efficient. But without intention, it can slowly push connection into the background. So we did something simple. We created a small routine. Not strict. Not complicated. Just intentional. One evening each week. No phones. No distractions. Just time. At first, it felt unnatural. Almost forced. Like we were trying too hard. And that's a common reaction. Because when something doesn't come automatically, we question it. We think, if it's real, it shouldn't feel like effort. But that belief is misleading. Because effort doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is valuable. You don't build something meaningful without investing in it. That weekly time became our starting point. Not perfect conversations. Not deep discussions every time. Sometimes it was simple. Talking about the week. Sharing random thoughts. Even sitting quietly, but intentionally. And slowly, something changed. Not in what we did. But in how we felt. There was less guessing. Less assumption. More clarity. Another thing we worked on was something even more basic. Attention. Not time. Attention. Because you can spend hours next to someone and still feel disconnected. But a few minutes of real attention? That can change everything. So we practice something small. When one person speaks, the other listens. Fully. No phone. No interruption. No half listening. It sounds obvious. But in real life, it's rare. And when you experience it, you feel the difference immediately. You feel seen. You feel heard. And most importantly, you feel valued. That's what connection is built on. Not big gestures, but consistent signals of presence. There's actually a concept called emotional bids, small attempts to connect. A question. A comment. A simple, look at this. And how you respond to those bids determines the strength of a relationship. Before, we missed many of those moments. Not intentionally. Just unconsciously. But now, we started noticing them. And responding differently. Turning toward, instead of away. Even in small ways. That awareness alone created change. But here's something else I had to learn. Building connection also means letting go. Letting go of old expectations. Old definitions. Old habits. I had to stop comparing everything to what I was used to. Because comparison creates resistance. And resistance blocks growth. Instead, I started asking. What works here? What feels real in this environment? Not what I expected. But what was possible. That shift, from comparison to curiosity, made everything lighter. Less pressure. Less frustration. More openness. And that openness allowed something new to form. Not a copy of the past. But a version of connection that belonged to this life. This place. This relationship. Another important piece was language. Not grammar. Not vocabulary. But emotional language. Learning how to express feelings clearly in English. Simple sentences like, I feel better when we talk like this. I miss spending time together. I like when we do this. These are not advanced sentences. But they are effective. Because they are direct. And in American communication culture, directness is often appreciated. It removes confusion. It creates clarity. And clarity builds trust. I stopped trying to translate my feelings perfectly. And started expressing them simply. And that made communication easier. Not perfect. But functional. And functional communication is enough to build something real. Over time, these small practices became habits. Not forced routines. But natural patterns. And that's when I realized something important. Connection doesn't come from intensity. It comes from consistency. You don't need dramatic conversations every day. You need regular moments of presence. And those moments build something stronger than any single emotional experience. They build stability. And stability is what makes something feel like home. Not excitement. Not novelty. But reliability. Knowing that connection is there, even in ordinary moments. That's what we were creating. Slowly. Quietly. Intentionally. Looking back, I can see the difference clearly. Before, I was waiting to feel close. Now, I was actively building closeness. Before, I relied on emotion. Now, I relied on action. And that shift changed everything. Because feelings are unpredictable. But actions can be chosen. Every day. In small ways. And those small choices add up. That's when I understood the deeper answer to a question I didn't even know I was asking. What makes a home? It's not a place. It's not a feeling that appears on its own. It's something you build. Through attention. Through communication. Through consistent effort. And once you understand that, you stop waiting. And you start creating. Even if it's slow. Even if it's imperfect. Because imperfect effort is always more powerful than silent hope. And I was finally done waiting. I was building. One small moment at a time. When change feels uncomfortable. Have you ever started changing, and suddenly felt like you didn't recognize yourself anymore? Not in a bad way. Just unfamiliar. Like you're becoming someone new, but you're not sure if you fully understand that person yet. That's what growth feels like. And no one really talks about that part. They talk about progress. They talk about improvement. But they don't talk about the discomfort of becoming different. Because change, even positive change, creates tension. Internal tension. After we started building new habits, communicating more, being intentional, things improved. Not perfectly. But noticeably. We connected more. We understood each other better. There was less confusion. Less distance. But something else appeared. Something I didn't expect. Doubt. Not about the relationship. About myself. Because I was changing the way I expressed love. The way I communicated. The way I reacted. And part of me started asking. Is this still me? That question is deeper than it sounds. Because when you adapt to a new culture, a new environment, a new relationship dynamic, you don't just change your behavior. You change your patterns. And patterns feel like identity. So when patterns shift, identity feels unstable. Before, I expressed care in certain ways. Checking often. Being present constantly. Showing love through closeness. Now, I was learning to balance that with space. With independence. With a different rhythm. And even though I understood it logically, emotionally, it felt strange. Almost like I was losing something. But here's what I realized. I wasn't losing myself. I was expanding. Adding new ways of being, without erasing the old ones. That distinction is important. Because many people resist change not because it's wrong. But because it feels like loss. When in reality, it's growth. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance. It's the discomfort you feel when your beliefs and your actions don't fully align. And during this time, I felt that. A lot. Part of me believed. Love means closeness. Another part was learning. Love can also mean space. Those two ideas felt like they were in conflict. But over time, I started to see something different. They weren't conflicting. They were complementary. Two different expressions of the same thing. And understanding that, reduced the tension. But it didn't remove the discomfort completely. Because growth always includes uncertainty. There were moments I wanted to go back. Back to what felt natural. Back to what felt easy. Even if it didn't fully work in this environment. That's the pull of familiarity. Your brain prefers what it knows, even if it's not effective. Because familiarity feels safe. But safe doesn't always mean right. And staying the same doesn't always mean staying connected. So I had to make a decision. Not once. Many times. To continue changing. Even when it felt uncomfortable. Even when it felt unclear. And here's something important I learned during that process. Discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign you're doing something new. And new things take time to feel natural. Another challenge during this stage was consistency. It's easy to start something. It's harder to maintain it. Because motivation fades. Energy fluctuates. Life gets busy. There were days we didn't follow the routine. Days we forgot. Days we slipped back into old habits. And in those moments, it's easy to feel discouraged. To think, maybe this isn't working. Maybe we're just different. But that's another trap. Expecting perfection. Growth is not linear. It's messy. Inconsistent. Sometimes invisible. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. So instead of expecting perfection, I focused on returning. Not starting over. Returning. Returning to attention. Returning to communication. Returning to intention. That mindset made everything easier. Less pressure. More patience. And patience is essential when building something meaningful. There was another moment that helped me understand this deeply. One evening, after a long day, we both felt tired. Low energy. Not very talkative. Old pattern would have been silence. Disconnection. But this time, something small happened. I don't have much energy today, but I still want to sit with you. That sentence changed the moment. Because it acknowledged reality, without disconnecting. It didn't force a conversation. It didn't create pressure. But it maintained presence. And presence is enough sometimes. That's when I realized. Connection doesn't require perfection. It requires intention. Even in low energy. Even in imperfect moments. You don't have to be your best version every day. You just have to be present. In whatever way you can. That's sustainable. That's real. And that's what creates long-term connection. Looking back, this stage, this uncomfortable phase, was one of the most important. Because it forced me to confront something deeper than communication. Identity. Who am I in this relationship? Who am I in this culture? Who am I becoming? Those questions don't have quick answers. But they lead to clarity over time. And clarity creates confidence. Not immediate confidence. But gradual. Quiet. Stable. The kind that doesn't depend on everything being perfect. And as that confidence grew, the discomfort started to feel different. Less like confusion. More like growth. Less like loss. More like expansion. That's when I understood something clearly. You don't build a new version of life without becoming a new version of yourself. And that process is not comfortable. But it's necessary. Because the old version of you was built for a different environment. A different context. A different life. And if you want something new, you have to allow yourself to grow into it. Even if it feels unfamiliar at first. Even if you question it sometimes. Because on the other side of that discomfort is something stable. Something real. Something you didn't just find, but built. And I was finally starting to feel it. Not fully. Not perfectly. but clearly enough to keep going. The quiet turning point. What if the biggest change in your life doesn't feel big at all? No dramatic moment. No emotional breakthrough. Just a quiet shift that you almost don't notice at first. And yet, everything after that feels different. That's what happened to me. After weeks of small changes, talking more, listening better, building routines, adjusting expectations, life didn't suddenly transform. There was no perfect moment. No clear line where everything became right. But one day, something felt different. Subtle. Calm. Stable. And it caught me off guard. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was trying so hard anymore. That was new. Before, everything required effort. Thinking about what to say. Trying to interpret reactions. Managing expectations. Always adjusting. But now? Things felt lighter. Not effortless. But natural. And that's when I realized we had crossed a turning point. Not because everything was solved, but because something fundamental had shifted. The way we related to each other. The way we communicated. The way we handled small moments. Those small moments, the ones that used to create confusion or distance, started to feel different. More predictable. More understood. For example, there was a moment one evening. A simple one. We were both busy, doing our own things. Before, that situation might have created distance. Silence without meaning. But this time, there was a quick check-in. Hey, I'll finish this, then we can sit together. That sentence was small. But it carried something important. Intention. Reassurance. Connection. And I didn't have to guess anymore. That's what changed. Before, I lived in interpretation. Now, I lived in clarity. And clarity removes a lot of emotional weight. There's something powerful about not having to wonder. Do they care? Are we okay? Because the answer becomes visible. Not through big actions, but through consistent signals. That's when relationships start to feel safe. Not exciting all the time. Not intense. But safe. And safety is often underestimated. People chase excitement. They chase passion. They chase emotional highs. But long-term connection? It's built on safety. On knowing where you stand. On trusting the pattern, not just the moment. That was the turning point. Not emotional intensity. But emotional stability. And that stability created something new. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding problems. But the kind that comes from understanding them. Working through them. And building something stronger because of them. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called positive reinforcement. When small actions lead to positive outcomes, your brain starts to repeat them naturally. And that's what was happening. We weren't forcing connection anymore. We were reinforcing it. Every time we listened. Every time we responded. Every time we showed up. Those moments created a feedback loop. Connection positive feeling more connection. And over time, that loop becomes the default. Not effort. But habit. And habits define relationships. Not intentions. Not promises. Habits. That realization changed how I saw everything. Before, I focused on feelings. Now, I focused on patterns. Because patterns are reliable. They show you what's real. Not what's said. Not what's promised. But what actually happens. Another thing I noticed was how my own mindset had changed. Before, I was reactive. If something felt off, I would question it immediately. Internally. Emotionally. Now, I was more grounded. More patient. More curious. Instead of reacting, I would observe. Instead of assuming, I would ask. That shift, from reaction to observation, is powerful. Because reaction creates tension. Observation creates understanding. And understanding leads to better decisions. There was one specific moment that made this clear. A small misunderstanding. Something about plans for the weekend. Before, that might have triggered frustration. Feeling ignored. Feeling unimportant. But this time, I paused. And asked a simple question. Did we misunderstand each other? That one question changed the direction completely. Instead of conflict, we got clarity. Instead of emotion, we got understanding. And that's when it really hit me. The relationship hadn't just changed. I had changed. The way I processed situations. The way I communicated. The way I responded. And that internal shift was just as important as everything external. Because relationships are not just about two people. They're about two systems of thinking. Two ways of interpreting reality. And when one system becomes clearer, everything becomes easier. Looking back, I can see how far we had come. Not in big milestones. But in small, consistent improvements. And that's the part many people miss. They look for dramatic change. But real transformation? It's quiet. Gradual. Almost invisible. Until one day, you realize things feel different. Better. More stable. More real. And that's when you know. You've built something. Not perfect. But strong. Not exciting every moment. But meaningful over time. That's the difference between something that feels good. And something that lasts. And for the first time, I wasn't questioning. Does this feel like home? I was starting to feel it. Naturally. Without forcing it. Without chasing it. Just experiencing it. And that's when I understood something clearly. Home is not a place you arrive at. It's a feeling that grows. When consistency replaces confusion. When clarity replaces guessing. When effort becomes habit. And once that happens, everything becomes quieter. Simpler. More grounded. And in that quiet, you finally feel something you've been searching for all along. Not excitement. Not intensity. But belonging. Real belonging. And it doesn't need to be loud to be real. Sometimes, the quietest changes are the ones that matter most. Redefining what home means. What if the reason you still feel empty isn't because something is missing, but because you're still holding on to a definition that no longer fits? Your life? That question stayed with me longer than I expected. Because for a long time, I thought I understood what home meant. It was familiar. Predictable. Emotionally safe in a way that didn't need explanation. Home was where things made sense without effort. Where you didn't have to explain your feelings in words, because people already understood. where connection felt automatic. And for a while, I kept trying to recreate that feeling. In a different place. In a different culture. In a different relationship. Without realizing something important. I wasn't just missing a place. I was missing a version of life that no longer existed. And that's why it felt so hard. Because you can't rebuild the past, in a completely new context. You can only create something new. But creating something new requires one difficult step. Letting go of the old definition. Not forgetting it. Not rejecting it. Just releasing it enough to make space for something else. That's what Section 10 is really about. Not external change. Internal redefinition. Because until your definition changes, your experience doesn't. You keep comparing. You keep expecting. You keep feeling like something is not enough. Even when things are actually working. That's exactly where I was. Everything in my life had improved. Communication was better. Connection was stronger. Daily life felt more stable. But a part of me still felt like something was missing. And I couldn't understand why. Until I asked myself a simple, but uncomfortable, question. What exactly am I expecting home to feel like? And when I tried to answer that, I realized something surprising. My definition of home was not based on my current life. It was based on memory. On past experiences. On emotional patterns that were shaped in a completely different environment. And without realizing it, I was measuring my present against my past. That's a difficult position to be in. Because no present moment can fully match a memory. Memory is selective. It highlights the good parts. It softens the difficult ones. It creates a version of reality that feels complete. But real life is not like that. Real life is dynamic. Imperfect. Evolving. So when you compare real life to memory, real life always feels incomplete. That realization changed something deep inside me. Because it made me see the problem clearly. It wasn't that my life was lacking. It was that my expectations were outdated. And outdated expectations create unnecessary dissatisfaction. So I started doing something different. Instead of asking, does this feel like home? I asked, what does home mean now, in this life? That shift, from comparison to redefinition, was powerful. Because it gave me control. Not over the situation. But over my interpretation of it. And interpretation shapes experience. So what did home start to mean? Not a perfect feeling. Not constant closeness. Not automatic understanding. Instead, it became something simpler. Something more grounded. Home became consistency. Communication. Mutual effort. Not every moment feeling perfect, but knowing that the foundation is stable. Knowing that if something feels off, it can be talked about. Knowing that connection is not assumed, but actively maintained. That's a different kind of comfort. Not passive. Active. Not something you receive. Something you participate in. And once I accepted that definition, something shifted again. The feeling of missing something started to fade. Not because everything became perfect. But because I stopped expecting perfection. There's something else important here. Redefining home doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means updating them. Aligning them with reality. With your current environment. With your current relationship. with who you are now, not who you were before. Because growth changes you. And when you change, your definitions need to change too. Otherwise, you create a mismatch between expectation and reality. And that mismatch feels like dissatisfaction, even when things are actually good. Another thing I realized during this process was how much control we actually have over our emotional experience. Not total control, but significant influence. Because how you define something determines how you feel about it. If home means perfect understanding at all times, you will feel disappointed often. If home means a place where we can work through misunderstandings, you will feel more grounded. Same situation, different interpretation, different emotional outcome. That's the power of redefinition. It doesn't change reality. It changes how you experience reality. And that changes everything. There was one moment that made this very clear to me. A completely ordinary moment. We were sitting together after a long day. Not talking much. Just being there. Before, I might have questioned that moment. Why aren't we talking more? Is something wrong? But this time, I felt calm. Not because the situation changed, but because my definition changed. I no longer expected every moment to feel emotionally full. I understood that presence is enough sometimes. And that understanding created peace. Not excitement, but peace. And peace is often what people are really searching for when they say they want home. Not intensity. Not constant connection. But a stable, reliable sense of belonging. And that's what I was finally starting to feel. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was understood. Understood in a way that made sense for this life. This relationship. This version of me. That's when the original question came back to me. What makes a home? And this time, I had a different answer. Not something I learned. Something I experienced. Home is not where everything feels easy. It's where effort feels worth it. Home is not where nothing goes wrong. It's where things can be made right. Home is not something you find. It's something you define. And once you define it clearly, you stop searching. And start recognizing it. Even in ordinary moments. Even in quiet evenings. Even in imperfect situations. Because you're no longer looking for a feeling that appears. You're living in a reality you helped create. And that's what finally made it real for me. Not perfect. But real. And for the first time. That was enough. The version of me I had to become. What if the life you want is waiting for a version of you that you haven't fully become yet? Not a completely different person. Not someone stronger, smarter, or more perfect. Just someone a little more aware. A little more intentional. A little more honest. That realization came to me quietly. Not in a big moment. But in the way I started responding to life. Because when I looked back at everything that had changed, our communication, our connection, our routines, I noticed something deeper. The biggest shift wasn't the relationship. It was me. And that's not always easy to admit. Because it's more comfortable to focus on external things. What the other person does. What the environment feels like. What's missing. But real growth? It's internal. It shows up in how you think, how you react, how you choose. And for a long time, I didn't see that clearly. I thought I needed better circumstances. More understanding. More alignment. More rightness. But what I actually needed was growth. Personal growth. The kind that doesn't feel dramatic, but changes everything over time. So what changed in me? Not everything. Just a few key things. But those few things made a big difference. The first was ownership. Before, I experienced my life. Now, I participated in it. That's a subtle but powerful shift. Experiencing means reacting. Participating means choosing. Before, if something felt off, I would wait. Wait for it to improve. Wait for the other person to notice. Wait for the situation to change. Now, I take action. Not aggressively. Not perfectly. But intentionally. If something feels off, I say it. If something feels good, I express it. If something needs attention, I give it. That sense of ownership changed how I moved through daily life. Less passive. More present. The second change was emotional responsibility. This one is harder. Because it requires honesty with yourself. Before, I would feel something, and assume it was caused by the situation. Or by the other person. Now, I pause and ask. What part of this feeling is mine? That question doesn't remove the situation. But it adds clarity. Because not everything you feel comes from what's happening now. Sometimes it comes from past patterns. Old expectations. Unspoken beliefs. And when you recognize that, you gain control. Not over everything. But over your response. That's what emotional maturity looks like. Not avoiding feelings. Understanding them. And choosing how to act from them. The third change was communication. Not just speaking more. Speaking better. Clearer. Simpler. More direct. Before, I would hesitate. Overthink. Try to find the perfect way to say something. Now, I focus on clarity. I feel this. I need this. I appreciate this. Simple sentences. But powerful. Because they remove confusion. And clarity strengthens connection. This is something many people learning English struggle with. They think they need advanced vocabulary to express deep feelings. But in reality, simple, honest language is more effective. Not perfect English. Real English. That's what builds real connection. The fourth change was patience. Not passive patience. Active patience. The kind where you keep showing up, even when results are slow. Because growth doesn't happen immediately. It happens through repetition. Through consistency. Through small efforts that don't always feel significant in the moment. There were still days where things felt off. Days where communication wasn't perfect. Days where we slipped into old habits. But instead of reacting strongly, I stayed steady. Not ignoring the problem. But not overreacting either. That balance, between awareness and patience, created stability. And stability builds trust. Not just in the relationship. In yourself. That's another important shift. Trusting yourself. Trusting that you can handle discomfort. That you can communicate. That you can adapt. Before, uncertainty felt overwhelming. Now, it feels manageable. Because I know I have tools. Not perfect tools. but functional ones. And that's enough. Looking back, I realized something important. The version of me that first felt lost could not have created the life I have now. Not because that version was weak, but because it was unprepared, unaware, unpracticed. Growth wasn't about becoming better. It was about becoming ready. Ready to communicate. Ready to understand. Ready to build something real. And readiness doesn't come from thinking. It comes from doing. From trying. From making mistakes. From adjusting. Over and over again. That's what shaped this new version of me. Not one big decision, but many small ones. Consistent ones. Intentional ones. And that's something I want you to think about. If you feel stuck. If you feel like something in your life isn't fully right. Ask yourself. Is it the situation, or is it the version of me interacting with it? That question is not about blame. It's about possibility. Because if the answer is even partly me, then change is possible. Not easy, but possible. And possibility is where growth begins. There's one more thing I want to share. Becoming a new version of yourself doesn't mean losing who you were. It means integrating what you've learned. Keeping what matters. And adding what's needed. You don't erase your past. You build on it. And when you do that, something powerful happens. You stop feeling like life is happening to you. And start feeling like you're shaping it. Not controlling everything, but influencing enough to make a difference. And that difference is what creates meaning. That's what creates stability. That's what creates something that feels like home. Not just around you, but inside you. And when that internal foundation is strong, external situations become easier to navigate. Not perfect, but manageable. And that's where I found myself. Not at the end of growth, but in a place where growth felt natural. Expected. Even welcomed. Because I knew something now that I didn't know before. The life I wanted was not waiting somewhere outside. It was waiting for me. To become the person who could build it. And I was finally becoming that person. Step by step. Moment by moment. Choice by choice. The home I finally felt. What if the feeling you've been chasing was never something you had to find, but something you were slowly becoming ready to feel? Not all at once. Not in one perfect moment. But gradually, quietly, almost without noticing. That's how it happened for me. There was no big event. No dramatic realization. Just an ordinary day. And yet, it felt different. We were at home. Nothing special. No plans. No deep conversations. Just a normal evening. Cooking. Moving around. Sharing small moments. And then, without warning, I noticed something. I wasn't thinking about what was missing anymore. I wasn't comparing. I wasn't questioning. I was just there. Present. Calm. At ease. And that's when it hit me. This is it. This is the feeling I've been trying to create. Not excitement. Not intensity. But something much quieter. Belonging. Real belonging. The kind that doesn't need to be proven. Doesn't need constant reassurance. It just exists. That moment didn't look important from the outside. But internally, it changed everything. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was building something anymore. I felt like I was living in it. That's the difference. There's a phase where you try. You adjust. You learn. You communicate. It feels active. Effortful. Then, slowly, something shifts. The effort doesn't disappear. But it becomes part of the rhythm. Not something you think about. Something you do naturally. And that's when something becomes real. That's when something becomes yours. Looking back at the beginning. At the confusion. The distance. The quiet frustration. It almost feels like a different life. Not because the situation was completely different. But because I was different. My expectations changed. My communication changed. My awareness changed. And those internal shifts reshaped my external experience. That's something I didn't fully understand before. You don't experience life as it is. You experience life as you interpret it. And when your interpretation changes, your experience changes. That's exactly what happened with home. At the beginning, home felt like something I had lost. Something I needed to recreate. Something outside of me. But now, home felt like something I was actively part of. Not something I expected to receive. Something I contributed to. Through presence. Through effort. Through consistency. That shift, from passive to active, made everything more meaningful. Because when you build something, you value it differently. You understand it. You respect it. You protect it. Not out of fear, but out of appreciation. There's another layer to this realization. One that I think many people don't talk about enough. Feeling at home is not about everything being perfect. It's about feeling safe, even when things are imperfect. Safe to speak. Safe to be quiet. Safe to be yourself. That kind of safety doesn't happen automatically. It's created. Over time. Through trust. Through repeated experiences. Through small moments where you show up, and the other person does too. And once that safety is there, everything else becomes easier. Not easy, but easier. Conflict feels manageable. Misunderstandings feel solvable. Silence feels peaceful, not empty. That's the difference. That's what I was finally experiencing. And it didn't come from one big change. It came from everything you've seen in this journey. The small conversations. The uncomfortable honesty. The consistent effort. The willingness to grow. All of it added up. Quietly. Gradually. Until one day, it felt natural. And that's something I want you to really think about. If you're in a place right now where things feel unclear, where connection feels distant, where you're questioning whether something is right, pause. And ask yourself, am I waiting for a feeling, or am I building it? Because those are two very different paths. Waiting creates frustration. Building creates progress. Even if it's slow. Even if it's imperfect. And here's something important. You don't need everything to be perfect to feel at home. You just need enough clarity, enough connection, enough intention. To feel grounded. To feel present. To feel like you belong. And belonging doesn't come from external conditions alone. It comes from internal alignment. When what you expect matches what you understand, matches what you're willing to build, that alignment creates peace. Not temporary happiness. Stable peace. And that's what lasts. As I sat there that evening, doing nothing special, I realized something simple, but powerful. I wasn't trying anymore. I wasn't analyzing. I wasn't adjusting. I was just living. And that's when I knew. I didn't miss home anymore. Because I had built one. Not identical to the past. Not perfect. But real. And more importantly, it was mine. Not because of where I was, but because of what I had created within it. And that's the final truth I want to leave you with. Home is not something you find when everything feels right. It's something you create. Until things start to feel right. And when that happens, you don't need to ask the question anymore. You don't need to search. You don't need to compare. You just feel it. Quietly. Deeply. Honestly. And that feeling? It's not loud. But it's strong enough to stay. If this story made you reflect, even a little, then maybe you're already closer than you think. Closer to clarity. Closer to connection. Closer to building something real. And maybe closer to home. What if the reason you still feel lost is not because life is against you, but because you haven't fully stepped into the life that's waiting for you? This story was never just about love. It was never just about feeling at home. It was about something deeper. Becoming the kind of person who doesn't wait for life to feel right, but learns how to make it right, slowly, honestly, and intentionally. Because the truth is, no one is coming to build your life for you. No perfect moment will suddenly appear. And that feeling you've been chasing? It only comes when you decide to stop waiting and start building. So before you leave this video, ask yourself one question. What am I still waiting for, that I could start building today? Don't answer it later. Don't ignore it. Because your answer might change everything. If this story touched something inside you, if even one moment made you pause, reflect, or feel understood, then this channel is for you. Here, we don't just learn English. We learn how to live, feel, and grow through real stories, slowly, clearly, and deeply. Subscribe now to follow more real English story practice. Like and share this video to someone who might need it today. And comment below. What does home mean to you? Because your story matters too. And maybe, just maybe, your next answer will lead you closer to the life you've been searching for.